The classroom settled into morning circle time, the familiar rustle of small bodies finding their spots on the rug. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. Mrs. Evans smiled at her first graders, taking a quiet moment to count heads. That's when she noticed Maya, usually so bright and attentive, clutching her teddy bear with a grip that looked almost painful. The other children were sharing their weekend adventures, a chorus of zoo visits and playground stories. When Maya's turn came, her voice was a small, thin thing. She didn't look up from the worn bear in her lap. "My bear got damaged this weekend," she whispered. "Not broken, not torn, damaged." The word landed in the warm room like a shard of ice. Mrs. Evans felt a familiar prickle of awareness, that subtle shift in the air when a child's world has tilted off its axis. She kept her expression calm, but her teacher's heart, the one that had learned to listen to the words children didn't say, began to beat a little faster. The morning unfolded with its usual rhythm of phonics worksheets and reading groups, but Mrs. Evans's attention kept drifting back to Maya. The little girl moved through her tasks with a quiet obedience that felt all wrong. The vibrant, curious child who usually raised her hand with such enthusiasm was gone, replaced by a silent, watchful version who flinched at the sudden scrape of a chair, and she never let go of the bear. During a water break, Mrs. Evans knelt beside her. The stuffed animal was clearly beloved, its brown fur worn soft in places from years of affection, but the new injuries were different. A long, ragged tear ran along its side, clumsily stitched shut with thick, dark thread that didn't match the plush fabric. One glass eye was missing entirely, leaving a dark, hollow socket. "That's a very brave bear," Mrs. Evans said softly, her voice just for them. "It looks like he's been through a lot." Maya nodded, her small fingers tracing the rough stitching. "He got damaged," she repeated, the same flat tone from circle time. "How did such a brave bear get so hurt?" Mrs. Evans asked, keeping her voice light, conversational. Maya's shoulders tightened. She looked toward the door, then back at her lap. "An accident," she murmured. "It was just an accident when the door closed." She stopped herself, biting her lip. "The door closed on him?" Mrs. Evans prompted gently. But Maya just shook her head, pulling the bear closer to her chest. "I have to fix him better," she whispered, more to the bear than to her teacher. "I need stronger thread." The bell for lunch finally rang, scattering children toward the cubbies. Mrs. Evans watched Maya carefully place the bear into her backpack, ensuring it was zipped securely inside before lining up. She moved to her desk and made a quick, discreet note on a fresh, sticky note. Maya, teddy bear, damaged, new tear, poorly stitched, mention of a door, withdrawn, anxious. She pressed the note to the inside of her planning binder, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. This was more than a broken toy. This was a story a little girl didn't yet have the words to tell. Later, during quiet reading time, she found her moment. The other children were scattered around the room with their books. Maya sat alone in the reading nook, the bear back in her arms, staring at a picture book without turning the pages. Mrs. Evans brought over 2 cushions and sat beside her, not too close. She picked up a book herself and pretended to read for a few minutes, just sharing the quiet space. "He must be your very best friend," she said after a while, nodding toward the bear. Maya nodded, her eyes glistening. "He protects me," she said, her voice barely audible. "From the loud noises at night." Mrs. Evans's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression soft. "Loud noises can be very scary," she agreed. "What kind of noises?" Maya shook her head, hugging the bear tighter. "Just yelling, and things breaking. My mommy says it's just the wind, but the wind doesn't say bad words." She looked up suddenly, as if realizing she'd said too much, a flash of fear in her eyes. "It's okay," Mrs. Evans said quickly, giving her a reassuring smile. "Everyone gets scared sometimes. Thank you for telling me." She placed a gentle hand on Maya's back for just a second before standing up to check on another student, leaving the little girl with her thoughts and her protector. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture she desperately wished was wrong. The damaged bear wasn't just a toy. It was a shield. And it was failing. The lunchroom buzzed with the chaotic energy of 20 first graders, a symphony of clattering trays and high-pitched chatter. Maya sat at her usual table, but she was an island of silence in the middle of the noise. Mrs. Evans watched from her monitoring spot near the trash cans, her attention never straying far from the little girl. The damaged bear sat on the table beside Maya's tray, propped up against her juice box like a silent dinner guest. While other children traded carrot sticks for cookies and argued over lunchbox contents, Maya's focus remained divided between picking at her food and ensuring the bear was safe. She would take a small bite of her sandwich, then her hand would dart out to adjust the bear's position, her fingers brushing over its rough stitches as if checking they were still holding. A boy from across the table reached over, curious, pointing at the bear's missing eye. Maya's reaction was instantaneous. She snatched the bear from the table and clutched it to her chest, her body turning away in a protective curl. Her lunch was forgotten. The message was clear. The bear was not a toy for sharing. It was something essential, something that required guarding. Mrs. Evans made a mental note of the uneaten food, adding it to the growing list of concerns. A child who is hungry but too anxious to eat is a child whose basic sense of security is fractured. Back in the classroom, the afternoon sun slanted across the art tables. Mrs. Evans had planned a simple drawing exercise. Today, I want you to draw a place where you feel safe and happy, she announced to the class. It can be anywhere you imagine. Most children immediately began sketching elaborate pictures of castles with moats, tree houses, or their own beds piled high with stuffed animals, the room filled with the quiet scratch of crayons and the soft rustle of paper. Maya hesitated for a long time, her blank paper a stark contrast to the busy scenes around her. She picked up a black crayon first, her small hand pressing hard onto the page. She drew a large, boxy shape, a house, but instead of a sunny yellow or a cheerful red, she colored it a dark, muddy gray, pressing so hard the waxy crayon left grooves in the paper. Then, in one window, she drew a small stick figure girl, and in the girl's arms, she drew a teddy bear. With a fierce, concentrated focus, she took a red crayon and made a single, violent slash across the bear's side. The red was stark and angry against the gray of the house. She didn't draw herself safe inside. She drew herself watching, holding the thing that had been hurt. Mrs. Evans's breath caught in her throat. She walked over casually, kneeling beside Maya's chair. "Tell me about your drawing, sweetheart," she said, her voice calm. Maya didn't look up. "It's my house," she whispered. "And that's me, and Bear. He got damaged there." She pointed a smudged finger at the red slash. "He protects me from the monsters." The other children were drawing literal monsters under beds or dragons in the sky. Mrs. Evans knew Maya's monsters were not imaginary. They were real, and they lived inside the gray house. This was no longer just a feeling, a collection of subtle signs. This was a cry for help, drawn in wax crayon on cheap construction paper. The art lesson was over. The investigation had now truly begun. She carefully collected all the drawings, making sure to slide Maya's into a separate folder. It was no longer a piece of child's art, it was documentation, evidence of a little girl trying to show the world a pain she couldn't yet speak aloud. The cheerful classroom felt suddenly too bright, the innocent chatter of the other children, a stark reminder of the childhood Maya was being denied, right in front of them. The final bell echoed through the hallway, triggering the usual after-school chaos of zipping coats and scrambling for backpacks. Mrs. Evans stood by the classroom door, saying her goodbyes, but her attention was fixed on Maya. The little girl moved slower than the others, carefully placing her folder and the damaged bear into her backpack with a solemnity that felt far too heavy for a 6-year-old. She kept glancing toward the entrance, her body tense with anticipation, rather than excitement. When the stream of parents began to flow into the hallway, Maya's mother appeared. She was a woman who always seemed to be in a hurry, her phone often in her hand, her smiles quick and distracted. Today was no different. She barely made eye contact as she reached for Maya's hand. "Come on, sweetie, we're late." Mrs. Evans seized the moment, stepping forward with a warm, professional smile. "Mrs. Sterling, I just wanted to quickly mention how creative Maya was in art today. The woman paused, her impatience barely concealed. Maya's grip on her backpack strap tightened. She drew a wonderful picture. Mrs. Evans continued, choosing her words with care. She's very attached to her teddy bear. It's such a special friend. I noticed it had a bit of damage, though. It looks like it's been through a lot. Maya's mother's smile tightened. She gave a short, dismissive wave of her hand. Oh, that old thing. She's had it forever. Kids are so rough on their toys. You know how it is. It's just a bit of wear and tear. She didn't look at the bear. She didn't ask about the art. She simply tugged on Maya's hand. We really have to go. Say goodbye to your teacher, Maya. The little girl murmured a quiet goodbye, her eyes downcast. As they turned to leave, Mrs. Evans saw Maya's free hand slip inside her backpack, her fingers undoubtedly searching for the comfort of the torn plush. The mother's dismissal was complete, her explanation hollow. Just wear and tear did not explain the fear in a child's eyes or the desperate, clumsy stitches holding her protector together. The classroom fell into a deep silence after the last child departed, a stark contrast to the energy of minutes before. Mrs. Evans moved through the motions of tidying chairs and wiping tables, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept seeing the red slash on the gray house, hearing the whispered confession about loud noises that knew bad words. Once the room was in order, she went to her desk and unlocked the bottom drawer where student files were kept. Her hands were steady, but a low thrum of anxiety pulsed in her veins. She pulled Maya Sterling's file, the manila folder feeling heavier than it should. Settling into her chair, she began to read under the glow of her desk lamp. The records showed a family that, on paper, was unremarkable. No prior calls home, no major behavioral reports from kindergarten. Attendance was nearly perfect. But as she read through the notes from the previous teacher, she saw the hints she'd been trained to look for. Phrases like, can be hesitant to participate in loud activities, and occasionally appears tired in the morning. Small things, easily explained away individually. A mosaic of minor concerns that, until today, had no central image. There was no record of any communication from home about family stressors, no mention of the bear, no indication that anyone else had noticed the quiet shift in Maya's world. The lack of prior concern was almost as worrying as the current evidence. It meant this might be a new escalation, a situation worsening behind closed doors. She closed the file, the quiet click of the folder sounding final in the empty room. This was beyond a simple conversation with a parent. The mother's dismissiveness had confirmed that. She needed guidance. She reached for her own notebook and began writing, transforming her sticky note observations and the memory of Maya's drawing into clear, factual bullet points. This was no longer just a feeling. It was a professional concern, and it required a professional response. Her next step was clear. She picked up the internal phone on her desk and dialed the extension for the school counselor, hoping she was still in her office. The plan was forming, a careful, gentle investigation to protect the little girl who trusted a damaged bear to keep her safe. The phone rang only once before a calm, measured voice answered. Patricia Evans, the school counselor said. How can I help? Mrs. Evans took a steadying breath, her notes spread on the desk before her. Patricia, it's Sarah Evans from room 104. I have a developing situation with a first-grade student, Maya Sterling, that I need to discuss. Do you have a few minutes? There was a soft rustle on the other end. Of course, I'm just finishing up some notes. Is this something that requires an immediate response, or more of a strategy session? A strategy session, I believe, Mrs. Evans said, her eyes drifting to the closed student file. But it feels urgent. I'll be right down. Minutes later, Patricia Chen, the school counselor, entered the classroom. She moved with a quiet grace that seemed to soften the edges of the room. She took a seat at a small student desk opposite Mrs. Evans, her attentive silence inviting the story to unfold. Mrs. Evans began with the morning circle, the specific word damaged, the visual of the poorly stitched bear. She described the guarded conversations, the drawing of the gray house with its red slash, the mother's dismissive reaction at pickup. She spoke in careful, factual terms, presenting her observations without judgment, but with clear concern. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression neutral but deeply focused, occasionally nodding as she took her own notes. When Mrs. Evans finished, the counselor was silent for a moment, absorbing the details. "You've done exactly the right thing by documenting this so carefully," she said finally. "The specificity is crucial. The word choice, the art, the change in behavior, these are the pieces we need." She leaned forward slightly. "The mother's deflection is a significant data point. It tells us that whatever is happening at home is not something she's willing to acknowledge or discuss, which often means she either feels shame or fear about the situation herself." Mrs. Evans felt a chill at the analysis. "So where does that leave us? What are our next steps?" Patricia tapped her pen gently on her notepad. "Our primary ethical duty is to the child's safety and well-being. We have enough here to warrant a closer look, but we need to move carefully. A direct accusation would likely make the family retreat, and we could lose any chance to help Maya." She outlined the process, continued daily observation, a review of any past involvement with other community agencies, and the possibility of a planned home visit under the guise of a routine educational check-in. "The goal of the visit isn't to confront," Patricia explained. "It's to observe the environment, to see the context of the bear's damage, to get a read on the family dynamics. We look, we listen, we build a more complete picture. Our role is to gather information to support the family, not to prosecute them." She discussed the strict documentation protocols, the need for absolute discretion, and the precise threshold that would necessitate a call to Child Protective Services. "We are their first line of defense, Sarah, not their last. Our intervention now could prevent a much worse situation later." The weight of the responsibility settled over them both, a shared understanding of the delicate path they had to walk for a little girl who communicated her fear through a torn stuffed animal. After Patricia returned to her office, Mrs. Evans remained at her desk, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the empty classroom. The conversation had crystallized her thinking. This was no longer a vague worry. It was a structured plan of action. The first step was the home visit. It had to feel natural, unforced, a standard part of the school's outreach rather than an investigation. She reached for her planner and found the upcoming parent-teacher conference schedule. The Sterlings weren't scheduled for another month. That was too long. She needed a legitimate pretext sooner. She drafted a brief, cheerful email to Maya's mother, phrasing it as a follow-up to their brief conversation at dismissal. She mentioned how impressed she was with Maya's detailed artwork and storytelling, framing it as a positive strength she wanted to encourage. She suggested a quick, informal home visit to discuss strategies for nurturing this creativity, offering a couple of potential times the following week. She made sure to mention that these visits were a new initiative the school was piloting to better partner with families, a white lie that lent institutional backing to her request. She hit send and sat back, the click of the mouse sounding unnaturally loud. The hook was cast. Next, she walked down to the main office to coordinate with the school administration. She requested a quick private word with the principal, Ms. Gable. In her office, with the door closed, Mrs. Evans gave a concise summary of the situation, emphasizing the counselor's involvement and the planned approach. "I need the office to be aware," she explained. "If the mother calls or comes in confused or concerned about the visit, it's important everyone is on the same page about it being a routine educational strategy." Ms. Gable, a veteran educator with tired but sharp eyes, listened intently. "You and Patricia have a plan?" she asked. "We do observation first, documentation, support. We escalate only if we have to." The principal nodded slowly. "All right, I'll brief the front desk. Keep me updated. And Sarah, trust your instincts. You have good ones." The administrative support was a relief, a safety net woven into the plan. Back in her classroom, Mrs. Evans prepared her observation toolkit. She wouldn't bring a clipboard or a formal checklist. That would seem too much like an inspection. Instead, she mentally rehearsed the things to look for: the placement of the bear in the home, the general state of the living space, not for cleanliness, but for signs of tension or disorder, the interactions between family members. She would listen for the tone of voice, not just the words. Her strategy was to be a warm, interested teacher, there to talk about creativity, while her compassionate, trained eye would be absorbing the environment Maya called home. She would pay her own way in, perhaps bringing a new book or a packet of art supplies as a gift for Maya, a token that would naturally allow her to be invited further inside. She set boundaries for herself, remembering Patricia's advice. She was there to observe, not to interrogate. Her role was to gather information that could help, not to force a confession. The plan was set. It was gentle, it was respectful, and its entire purpose was to see if the home behind the gray crayon drawing matched the fear in a little girl's eyes. The following Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Evans found herself standing on the Sterling's front porch, a bag containing a new sketch pad and colored pencils clutched in her hand. The house was exactly as Maya had drawn it, a boxy, neutral-toned home on a street of nearly identical houses. But where the drawing had been a flat, oppressive gray, the actual house was just tired. The paint was faded, the garden beds were overgrown with weary-looking shrubs, and a single, lonely-looking tricycle lay on its side in the grass. She took a steadying breath, fixed a warm, professional smile on her face, and rang the bell. The door was opened not by Mrs. Sterling, but by Maya, her eyes wide with surprise. Behind her, the house was dim. "Hi, Maya," Mrs. Evans said softly. "I brought something for you." Maya just stared, her grip tightening on the doorframe. A moment later, her mother appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked flustered. "Oh, Mrs. Evans, I got your email. Come in, come in. Sorry for the mess." The mess was the first thing Mrs. Evans noted. It wasn't a dirty mess, but a chaotic one. A laundry basket overflowing with clean clothes sat at the bottom of the stairs. A stack of unopened mail covered half the kitchen counter, visible from the entryway. Several moving boxes, seemingly unpacked from a move long past, were pushed against a wall in the living room. The air held a faint, stale scent of old coffee and unresolved tension. It was the home of people who were managing, but just barely, and whose energy was spent on survival, not comfort. Mrs. Sterling led her into the living room, quickly clearing a space on the couch by moving a pile of folded blankets. "Can I get you some coffee? Water?" she asked, her movements quick and nervous. "Water would be lovely, thank you," Mrs. Evans said, sitting down. Her eyes did a slow, careful sweep of the room. The furniture was nice, but worn. A long, thin crack webbed across one of the window panes, repaired with clear tape. On the wall opposite her, a series of family photos hung slightly crooked. In one, a younger, smiling Mrs. Sterling held a baby Maya. The man beside her had his arm around her, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He was absent from the more recent photos. Maya hovered near the hallway, watching them both. Mrs. Evans patted the space next to her on the couch. "Maya, come show me where you like to do your drawings." The little girl approached slowly and pointed to a small table in the corner, its surface scattered with crayons and a few pieces of paper. It was a dedicated space, which was good, but it was also in the direct line of sight of the front door in the kitchen, a central thoroughfare with little privacy. Mrs. Evans's gaze then traveled to the staircase. Halfway up, on a step, sat the teddy bear. It was positioned carefully, as if placed there to watch over the household, its one glass eye staring blankly into the living room. It was a sentinel in a house that clearly felt it needed one. Mrs. Sterling returned with a glass of water, her eyes following Mrs. Evans's glance toward the stairs. A faint flush crept up her neck. "Oh, that bear," she said with a forced laugh. "Maya's old thing. She leaves him all over the place." She took a quick sip from her own glass. "He's a very important friend," Mrs. Evans said, keeping her tone light and conversational. She turned to Maya. "Does he have a special spot where he sleeps at night?" Maya looked from her teacher to her mother and back again. then nodded slowly. He sleeps with me, to keep the monsters away. She said it so matter-of-factly that it made the air in the room feel thin. Mrs. Sterling's smile tightened. She has quite the imagination. Always has. She walked over and picked up the bear, holding it out. See, just an old toy. He's seen better days. She pointed to the rough stitching. This was from when our old dog got a hold of him. Poor thing didn't know any better. Mrs. Evans took the bear gently. The stitching was crude and haphazard, done with a thick, dark thread that pulled the plush fabric awkwardly together. It didn't look like the work of an animal's teeth. It looked like the work of frantic, unskilled human hands. A dog's damage would be more shredded, more scattered. This was a single, deliberate tear that had been urgently closed. She ran her thumb over the empty eye socket. "And this?" she asked softly. Mrs. Sterling waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, that popped out ages ago. We just never got around to fixing it." But Maya, standing beside her teacher, shook her head almost imperceptibly, her small face pale. She looked at the bear in Mrs. Evans's hands with a profound sadness. The stories were diverging right in front of her. The mother spoke of a dog and old age, a narrative of accidental, manageable wear. The child's silent communication spoke of a sudden, violent event that had broken her protector and left him forever watchful with a single eye. Mrs. Evans handed the bear back to Maya, who immediately clutched it to her chest. "Well," Mrs. Evans said, shifting back to her pretext with practiced ease, "shall we look at those art strategies?" For the next 15 minutes, she talked about encouraging creativity, all while her mind processed the scene. The taped window, the nervous energy of the mother, the starkly different accounts of the bear's injury, and the way that stuffed animal was treated not as a toy, but as a vital shield placed on the stairs like a guardian. The home was not a place of overt danger, but of profound stress and hidden fractures. The bear wasn't just damaged. It was a testament to a moment of crisis that the adults in the house were trying desperately to explain away. The evidence wasn't in what was said, but in the chilling space between the two stories she had just been told. The next morning, Mrs. Evans arrived at school early with a new purpose. The home visit had confirmed her deepest concerns. The conflicting stories about the bear, the tense atmosphere, the unspoken fear in Maya's eyes. She needed context, a wider view of the family life hidden behind closed doors. During her prep period, she walked down to the main office on a pretext of checking her mailbox. The school secretary, Mrs. Gable, who knew everything about everyone in the community, was sorting through attendance slips. "Quiet morning?" Mrs. Evans asked casually, leaning against the counter. Mrs. Gable sighed. "Quiet enough. Just the Johnsons calling to say their car won't start." She lowered her voice slightly. "Speaking of car trouble, I saw the Sterling's car at the repair shop again last week. That thing's on its last legs. Poor Celia looks so stressed." Mrs. Evans nodded sympathetically. "It's so hard when things keep breaking down. The Sterlings live on Elm, right? I think I saw Mr. Henderson walking his dog near there yesterday. Such a friendly man." The secretary smiled. "Oh, old Mr. Henderson knows everyone on that street. He's always out with that dog of his, morning and evening, like clockwork. Says it keeps him young." It was the opening she needed. A few hours later, during her lunch break, Mrs. Evans drove to Elm Street and parked a few houses down from the Sterlings. She didn't have to wait long. Right on schedule, an elderly man with a terrier on a leash rounded the corner. She got out of her car, pretending to check something in her trunk. "Beautiful day," she called out with a friendly wave. Mr. Henderson stopped, the terrier sniffing at the sidewalk. "That it is. Might get some rain later, though." He squinted at her. "You're the teacher, aren't you? From the school? Little Maya's teacher." "I am," she said, walking closer. "It's nice to meet you properly. Maya's such a sweet girl." He nodded, his expression softening. "A quiet little thing. Always looks so serious when she walks by. Not like most kids." He shook his head slightly. "Tough year for that family. Real tough." Mrs. Evans kept her tone light, conversational. "It's never easy, is it? I know her mother works so hard." The man leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "Between you and me, it's not just the work. The yelling. Some nights, you can hear it right down the street. My missus and I, we keep our windows closed on the bad nights. Sounds like a real war zone in there sometimes. And the slamming. Goodness, the door slamming. He patted his dog absently. We thought it'd get better after the husband took off, but if anything, the stress just got louder. Poor Celia. Poor kid. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation. Well, better finish the walk. Come on, Buster. He tipped his hat and continued down the sidewalk, leaving Mrs. Evans standing by her car, the man's quiet testimony, painting a vivid, awful picture of the nights in the gray house. The wind didn't say bad words. People did. Back in the silent sanctuary of her classroom after the final bell, Mrs. Evans locked the door and returned to Maya's file with a new, grim determination. Before, she had looked for obvious red flags. Now, she knew what patterns to trace. She started with the attendance records, pulling not just Maya's, but the class master list for the entire previous year. She created a simple chart marking the days Maya was absent. Then she cross-referenced them with the days following major holidays, the Tuesdays after long weekends, the weeks after winter and spring break. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. A cluster of absences always followed a Monday holiday, a day for tensions to build behind closed doors without the relief valve of school, often resulting in a Tuesday morning where Maya was kept home. She then pulled the notes from the kindergarten teacher, reading them again with this new lens. The phrases took on a darker, more specific meaning. Hesitant to participate in loud activities, now read as a child conditioned to flinch at raised voices. Occasionally appears tired became a child kept awake by nighttime arguments. She found a note from the previous April. Maya came to school very quiet today, said her bear had an accident, was clingy all morning. The teacher had noted it as a minor emotional upset. Mrs. Evans now saw it as an earlier benchmark of the same trauma. Her most chilling discovery was in the cumulative health file. There was a note from a vision screening conducted at the start of the year. The nurse had recorded that Maya hesitated and became anxious during the eye exam, specifically when asked to cover her left eye to read the chart with her right. The nurse had put it down to a typical child's nervousness. But Mrs. Evans saw the date of the screening. It was the week after Labor Day, a Tuesday after a long weekend. She stared at the note, her blood running cold. The bear's left eye was missing. The timeline suggested the damage to the protector, and the child's fear about her own eye might have happened on the same terrible night. It wasn't just a broken toy. It was a symbol of a direct threat. The records were no longer just paper. They were a timeline of distress, each notation a silent echo of the yelling Mr. Henderson heard down the street. The evidence was no longer a collection of suspicions. It was a clear, documented history, and it pointed toward a home environment that was causing a little girl tangible harm. The breaking point wasn't coming. She was already living in its aftermath. The final piece fell into place on a Thursday morning during a routine phonics lesson. The children were using small mirrors to watch the shapes their mouths made for different sounds. Mrs. Evans moved between the desks, offering gentle corrections. When she reached Maya, the little girl was staring intently into her mirror, not at her own mouth, but at her own reflection. Her small finger traced a line along her own left temple, then down her cheek, a path that mirrored the exact angle of the ragged tear on her bear's face. She wasn't practicing her vowel sounds. She was retracing a map of remembered pain. Mrs. Evans's breath caught in her throat. In that moment, the abstract fear became terrifyingly concrete. The damaged bear wasn't just a symbolic protector. It was a surrogate. It had taken the hit meant for her. The poorly stitched tear wasn't from a dog. It was a frantic, maternal attempt to sew back together what had been broken in a moment of rage, a visual echo of an injury that had thankfully missed its intended target, but had shattered a child's sense of safety forever. The drawing, the whispers, the neighbor's account. It all coalesced into a single, horrifying certainty. This was not a family struggling with stress. This was a child in active physical danger, her only shield a stuffed animal now permanently disfigured by the violence it had absorbed. The professional distance Mrs. Evans had maintained evaporated. A cold, clear fury settled in its place, not for the struggling mother, but for the helplessness of the child. She finished the lesson on autopilot, her mind already racing toward the only possible next step. The time for gentle observation was over. The school counselor's office felt different this time. The usual calming atmosphere of soft chairs and warm lighting did nothing to ease the tension. Mrs. Evans sat across from Patricia Chen. The compiled evidence, the drawing, her detailed notes, the attendance chart, the nurse's report, spread on the low table between them. She had just finished speaking, her voice steady but tight with the gravity of her discovery. Patricia was silent for a long moment, her usual composure replaced by a deep, focused seriousness. She picked up the drawing of the gray house, her eyes lingering on the red slash. "This changes everything," she said quietly, putting the paper down. "The correlation between the bear's injury and her own anxiety about her eye. This is no longer about interpreting subtle signs. This is a direct indicator of physical threat." She looked at Mrs. Evans. "You understand what this means. As mandated reporters, our legal and ethical obligation is clear. We have reasonable cause to suspect a child has been abused or is in danger of being abused. We are required to report this. Now." Mrs. Evans nodded, her stomach a knot of anxiety and grim resolve. Patricia picked up the phone on her desk, a direct line she knew too well. Her conversation with the CPS intake worker was clinical and precise. She gave Maya's full name, date of birth, and address. She summarized the key evidence: the child's own art and verbal disclosure of monsters and loud noises, the physical evidence of the bear's damage correlating to the child's sudden fear regarding her own eye, the neighbor's account of domestic disturbances, and the parent's minimization and failure to protect. She listed herself and Mrs. Evans as the reporting parties. She hung up and let out a long breath. "They're opening an investigation. A caseworker will be assigned within 24 hours. They will likely contact the school first to interview us and Maya, before making a home visit. The plan was no longer theirs to manage. They had passed the threshold. The machinery of child protection was now in motion, and their role had shifted from investigators to vital witnesses for a little girl who had finally been heard. The call came on a Friday morning. The caseworker, a woman named Anya, with a calm, steady voice, asked if they could meet at the school that afternoon. She arrived precisely at 3:30, just as the final bell was ringing. Mrs. Evans and Patricia met her in the counselor's office, the space now feeling like a command center. Anya listened intently as they walked her through the entire timeline, from the first whispered word to the chilling mirror incident. She examined the drawing, asked quiet, specific questions about the bear's stitches and the mother's demeanor, and took meticulous notes. Her professionalism was a bedrock in the swirling anxiety of the moment. The plan was swift and coordinated. Anya would lead the meeting with the mother at the family home the next morning. Mrs. Evans's role was to be present as the educational witness, the one who could speak to Maya's behavior and work at school. Patricia would be there for support and to outline the counseling resources available. The goal was not to ambush or accuse, but to present the observed concerns calmly and factually, framing the intervention as support for the entire family's stability. "We lead with the child's well-being," Anya said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We are here because Maya has shown us she is scared, and it is our job to make sure she is safe." The meeting was set for 10 a.m. The longest night of Mrs. Evans's teaching career stretched out before her. The following morning, the atmosphere in the Sterling living room was thick with a silence that felt like its own presence. Mrs. Sterling sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her face a pale mask of confusion and dawning fear. Anya began, her voice respectful but firm, laying out the reasons for their visit. She started with the school's observations: Maya's withdrawal, the concerning artwork, the specific language. She then gently introduced the neighbor's account of the loud arguments, not as gossip, but as community concern. Mrs. Sterling initially reacted with deflection, just as she had at the school door. "She has a big imagination," she insisted, her voice tight, "and old men hear things." Then Anya held up the photograph of the teddy bear, zoomed in on the crude, haphazard stitching. "Mrs. Sterling, she said, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. "We are very concerned about how this injury occurred. Can you help us understand?" The woman's eyes fixed on the photo. The defensive anger seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind something raw and exhausted. She looked from the picture to Mrs. Evans, to the counselor, and then her gaze dropped to her own trembling hands. The room held its breath. The silence stretched, filled only by the quiet tick of a clock from the kitchen. When she finally spoke, her voice was a broken whisper. "It was a bad night." She swallowed hard, refusing to look up. A plate was thrown. It hit the wall. There was screaming, so much screaming. I found her after, in her room. She was just holding him, and he was torn. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. I tried to fix him. I didn't know what else to do. She didn't name the other person in the room that night, but she didn't have to. The admission hung in the air, a confession not of malice, but of a failure to protect. It was the crack in the dam. The intervention was no longer about presenting evidence. It was about offering a lifeline to a woman who was finally, terrifyingly, admitting she was drowning. The meeting shifted instantly from confrontation to crisis management. Anya's posture softened from investigator to protector. "Our absolute priority right now is Maya's immediate safety," she stated, her voice calm but leaving no room for negotiation. A safety plan was implemented on the spot. The first and most critical rule was that the individual responsible for the violent outburst, implicitly understood to be the occasional presence of Maya's father, was not to be in the home or have any unsupervised contact with Maya until a full risk assessment could be completed. Anya helped Mrs. Sterling program her phone with direct numbers for a 24-hour domestic violence hotline and the CPS emergency line. At school, a parallel plan snapped into place. Mrs. Evans was given a direct line to Anya and instructed to report any change in Maya's demeanor, any absences, or any concerning interactions at pickup immediately. Maya was quietly added to the list for the school's breakfast program, ensuring a guaranteed nourishing meal each morning regardless of the home situation. Patricia scheduled daily check-ins with Maya, 10 minutes of dedicated time in her office that would be framed as a special talking time to help her feel important, but would functionally serve as ongoing emotional monitoring. The most poignant safety measure concerned the bear itself. With Mrs. Sterling's hesitant permission, Mrs. Evans gently suggested that the bear might need a hospital visit to be properly fixed. The next day, she brought in a small sewing kit with soft, tan thread and a carefully selected matching button from her grandmother's old collection. During lunch, in the empty classroom, she didn't just repair the tear. She carefully removed the jagged, frightening stitches and replaced them with neat, small ones. She sewed the new button firmly in place of the missing eye. She wasn't just mending a toy, she was symbolically helping to mend the child's sense of security. When she handed the bear back, his wound was closed with care, not panic, and he looked out at the world with two calm, brown eyes. Maya held him, her fingers stroking the smooth button, a tiny, tangible sign that broken things could be properly fixed, that adults could make things safe again. The physical protector was restored, and the network of adult protectors now surrounded her, a visible and invisible shield against the monsters. The immediate crisis had been contained, but the real work of healing was just beginning. Anya, the CPS caseworker, laid out a structured plan for the Sterling family, framing it not as punishment, but as a scaffold to rebuild upon. The first requirement was for Mrs. Sterling to engage with a dedicated domestic violence support program, one that offered both individual therapy and group sessions. This wasn't just about processing the past. It was about equipping her with the tools to recognize unhealthy patterns, establish firm boundaries, and build a safety plan she could actually maintain. Anya also connected her with a financial advisor from a local community organization. The stress of an unreliable car and mounting bills was a tangible pressure point, and addressing it was a practical step toward reducing the household's overall tension. For Maya, the mandate was clear: ongoing play therapy with a clinician specializing in childhood trauma. These sessions would give her a language for her fear and a safe space to process the experiences she had only been able to show through her bear and her drawings. The plan included a strict supervision protocol. Any visitation or contact from Maya's father would require prior approval from CPS and would need to be supervised by a professional at a designated family center until he completed his own mandated anger management and parenting courses. Progress would be monitored through weekly check-ins with Anya and monthly review meetings with the entire team, the caseworker, the therapists, and Mrs. Evans at school. The consequences of disengaging were made gently but unequivocally clear. The primary goal was family preservation, but that goal was entirely dependent on their active participation in creating a safe and stable environment for Maya. The support was extensive, but it was a two-way street requiring commitment and honesty. The changes in Maya did not happen overnight, but they began with small, quiet moments. The daily check-ins with the school counselor, Patricia, became a cherished ritual. At first, Maya would just sit in the cozy office, clutching her repaired bear, saying nothing. Patricia never forced her to talk. They would sometimes just draw together in comfortable silence. After a few weeks, Maya began to share little things. A funny story from class, a drawing she was proud of. The bear, now with two calm eyes, sat between them, a silent witness to her growing sense of safety. In her official play therapy sessions, she began to use dolls and sand trays to act out scenes, slowly giving form to the monsters she had only ever whispered about. At school, the frantic, anxious energy that had defined her began to soften. Mrs. Evans noticed she was eating her entire lunch again. She started raising her hand tentatively during story time, her answers quiet but sure. The other children, sensing the shift, began to include her more in their games. She still carried her bear, but the grip was no longer desperate. It was comfortable, familiar. The most profound moment came one afternoon during art. The assignment was to draw a happy memory. While other children drew birthdays and trips to the zoo, Maya carefully drew a picture of her bedroom. She drew herself in bed, asleep, and she drew the bear sitting on her nightstand, standing guard. But this time, the bear was whole, and the room was bathed in a warm yellow light. She was still drawing her protector, but the narrative had changed. The monster was gone. The bear was no longer taking damage. He was simply watching over her, ensuring her dreams were safe. She was learning, stitch by emotional stitch, that trust could be rebuilt and that not all adults would let the monsters in. The formal review meeting 6 months later felt like observing a different family. Mrs. Sterling sat straighter, her voice carrying a new, quiet steadiness as she reported on her progress with the support group. The financial counseling had helped stabilize their budget, and the constant, grinding stress had eased from her face. The therapist's report showed Maya was making significant strides, using her words to describe feelings instead of acting them out through her toys. The supervised visits with her father were ongoing and strictly structured. His participation in his own mandated program was a positive sign, but the professionals emphasized this was a marathon, not a sprint. Trust, once broken, is rebuilt in inches, not miles. The CPS caseworker outlined the plan for the next phase. Monthly check-ins instead of weekly, with the school remaining a vital partner in monitoring Maya's well-being. The safety net was still there, but it was looser, designed to support the family's growing independence, rather than hold them upright. The goal was no longer just crisis management. It was building a new, healthier normal where a child's biggest worry could go back to being spelling tests and playground games. Not the mood of the adults in her home. That little girl's quiet word, damaged, was a key that unlocked a world of silent fear. It was a reminder that the most important language we can learn isn't in any curriculum. It's the language of a child who needs help but doesn't know how to ask. Maya's story is a testament to the power of gentle observation, of listening to the words spoken and the ones held tightly in a fist around a torn teddy bear. Her healing began the moment a teacher decided that a child's fear was more important than a parent's excuse. It's a call to all of us to pay attention to the subtle signs, to trust our instincts when something feels wrong, and to be the calm, steady presence that a child can finally lean on. The greatest protection we can offer often starts with simply noticing. If this story resonated with you, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Your presence in this community matters. And if you want more stories of compassion and quiet courage, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.